to be the first witnesses of the most important event in the whole history of mankind. Like the resurrection is the focal point of Jesus's life. Welcome back to the Authentic Christian Podcast. I'm Aaron. This is Scott. And today we're talking about the timeline of the events of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So in the first two episodes, we really focused our time on episode 1 is this idea of mythicism, that Jesus was not a real historical character. People say, well, Jesus, he never even existed. It's just something that people have fabricated. We looked at all of the basically eyewitnesses. We looked at biblical writers. Even if you don't think the Bible's inspired, there's still eyewitness accounts. Then we looked at Christian writers who were not inspired, like the early church fathers. And finally, we looked at hostile witnesses, like Roman historians, people who hated Christianity, and yet they wrote about Jesus and his followers, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the second episode, we talked more about the theories of what happened to Jesus's body and how I think a lot of people don't really have that much of an issue with the life of Jesus and the death, and they even like some of his teachings. But the real problem they have is the resurrection. Because if the resurrection is real, that means miracles are real, which means there's a God, and you can't just live with the evolutionary mindset of I can do whatever I want because I'm just a glorified evolved animal. And so we talked about how miracles is the problem because it requires you to live your life a different way. And then we looked at some of the different things, and we wanted to do those episodes first. And then this next episode that we want to do is really want to go through the timeline of the events of the resurrection. I can honestly say of all the studies I've ever done, the one that I really stands out to me as maybe one of the most important was I was doing a gospel meeting on the life of Christ, and I was going to preach on the resurrection, what happened. And so I was in Mississippi at a church. And so I was like sitting at a coffee shop, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and reenact, like try to, what's it called, like a, what did McGarvey, parallel gospel, the fourfold gospel, where you try to make all the accounts parallel with each other. Yeah, the fourfold gospel. That's a book by J.W. McGarvey.
Yeah.
So I started doing it for the resurrection events. And I went through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and it was going great. Like I had a timeline, I was writing the verses, the parallel accounts. And then I got to John, and it really threw a wrench into my plan.
It's not one of the synoptic gospels.
Yeah, no. And I learned that, and I was like, wait, this doesn't match. Yeah. And I kind of got nervous at first because I thought I know that I didn't find a contradiction nobody else has found, but I was really frustrated. Well, I'd remembered talking to Scott Kane like years ago at a men's retreat in Georgia, and I had talked to him about the resurrection. I think he had maybe done a lesson on it that I heard or something, but somehow in the cabin, we got talking about it. And so I texted him, and I basically said, hey, man, this is what I'm doing. I'm putting a timeline together, and I got a real problem. I got to John, and I don't remember exactly what he texted. I tried to go back and check it the other day, but it's over a year, so my phone deletes all the texts. But the gist of it is he said, I'll give you a hint. Peter goes to the tomb twice. And I was like, Peter goes to the tomb twice. I'm like, okay, because that was my problem. In one of the accounts, Peter runs in, and in John, I think it is, he stoops outside and looks in. So I had two different conflicting accounts about Peter. Yep. And so he said, I'll send you some stuff later, but that's your hint. Peter goes to the tomb twice. And so then I started looking at it again, and it started to click, and then he sent me something else, and it really clicked. And so what I want to do is go through this together. I would encourage anybody that's watching to try to go through a study like this and make your own timeline, because you'll find stuff that challenges you, and then you see how it all clicks together. And for me, it was just like eye-opening. I mean, if I can say this, it almost took the text from black and white and gave it color, because now I can visualize without even looking at the text. I can see how all the events played out that morning.
Well, it's a picture, and it's being painted by different witnesses from different viewpoints, right? And that's the point. John is at a different time. It's written for different people. It covers some different details at times.
Yeah.
And it might even have a different point or thrust to the book. And it's interesting when you go and you combine all these different details, and you see, like you were saying, a color picture, so to speak. You have all the different components of that. Yeah.
I think it made it stick for me. So that's what I want to do this morning is look at it together and just follow along. For me, I don't know, whenever I think about how all the things sort of play together, I don't know. I hesitate to say life-changing, but it kind of is for me.
It's a nuance that really helps you to appreciate it and connect with it.
Yeah.
And
I agree. All right. So let's talk about the events leading up to the crucifixion, sort of the background. So if we were to start with John 13 through 17, John spends a lot more time on the last week of Jesus. I mean, I think it's almost half the book is on the last week. So in John 13 through 17, he's in the upper room with the disciples. That's when he washes their feet. That's when he institutes the Lord's Supper, communion, people call it, different names for it. Judas leaves and Jesus prays for him, right? Well, in John 18, starting in verse 1, that's where he's arrested illegally. And then he's taken to Annas first and to Caiaphas. We actually go through in season 1, episode 27, we talk about the trial, arrest, the scourging, everything leading up to the crucifixion. We talk about that. So if you want that information, you can go to season 1, episode 27. But basically, to summarize it, he's arrested illegally in the garden without any sort of warrant or evidence. He's taken to Annas, who was the deposed high priest, which was illegal. Taken to Caiaphas. The entire council has an overnight trial, which was illegal. Sent to Pontius Pilate the next morning. He sends him to Herod. Pontius says he's innocent, sends him to Herod. Herod finds him innocent, sends him back to Pilate. He's innocent again. Pilate still washes his hands. They scourge Jesus. They lead him to the cross. He's put on the cross at 9 a.m. 3 hours of light takes you to noon. And then there's 3 hours of darkness, which we talked about, the alleged eclipse that all the ancient non-believing writers said, and we said it can't be an eclipse. And so finally, Jesus dies at 3 p.m. And we looked at Matthew 27, where the veil is torn top to bottom. There's earthquakes that also the early non-Christian writers referenced and tried to explain away. And then Matthew 27, we talked about how there was this resurrection of other saints that happened when Jesus resurrected. Okay, that still we haven't gotten to there yet. But in Matthew 27, look at verse 57. I kind of want to start here. I guess this is still, earlier, but I just think it's
57,
really, Matthew 27. Okay. Yeah. And read verse 57 through 61.
Now, when evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. Where do you want me to stop?
No, keep going. 61.
Okay, 61. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb.
Okay, so Joseph of Arimathea goes and asks Pilate for the body. In Mark's account, Mark 15:43, it says he gathered up courage and basically asked for the body. He's a prominent man of the council. I would assume if they just killed Jesus, you have to be thinking, if I go and ask for the body, are they going to associate me with him and maybe punish me or something? I don't know. So he gathers up this courage. He goes and gets the body. They bury it. And in verse 61, you've got Mary Magdalene was there and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb. So I don't know if anybody else is with them, but you have the two Marys who are just sitting there looking at this tomb. I don't know what they're thinking, but their Lord is basically just, they've seen him be crucified and died. I don't know if they were allowed to be at the scourging. Maybe they saw that too. And so they're sitting there. I can only assume they're heartbroken, right? And so then basically what you have next is you have what happens on Saturday, all right? So read Matthew 27, just continuing. This is what happens on what we would call Saturday or the Sabbath, which is ironic because what are you not supposed to do as a Jew on the Sabbath?
Well, there's a lot of things.
Well, what's the big one? If you do it
not work.
Yeah, not work, or you're supposed to die, right? Yeah. So look at what the chief priests are so concerned about on the Sabbath. Look at Matthew 27, read 62 through 66.
On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember, while he was still alive, how that the deceiver said, After 3 days I will rise. Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, He's risen from the dead. So the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, You have a guard, go your way, make it as secure as you know how. And so they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone, setting the guard.
Okay, so it's on the Sabbath, and they're concerned with them stealing the body, so they work on the Sabbath. I mean, you can, I guess, make that assumption for yourself. They're so concerned about Jesus because he broke the Sabbath. This man heals on the Sabbath. He breaks the law. What should we do? Kill him. So then they want to do what?
We should kill.
Then we should do work on this. They do work on the Sabbath.
I know.
Exactly.
At every level of hypocrisy possible.
Exactly. So, okay, so it's Sunday, right? So this is the morning of the resurrection, all right? So I want to paint a picture. Now, if anybody watches this, we have the podcast resource page, and on it we have documents that we talk about you can download. I have a Word document that I put together with all these events. So for instance, I'm not going to read all these as we go through it, but the trip to and the arrival at the tomb, that's Matthew 28, 1 through 4, Mark 16, 1 through 5, Luke 24, 1 and 2, and John 20, 1 and 2, right? Now, we're not going to read all those because we're trying to paint a 35,000 foot view. But if you want to go back and read those, you can see. And so if you go to the podcast page, which there'll be a QR code on the screen right now, you can go and you can download this Word document or PDF, whatever it'll be, and you can go through it as you want. I'll probably do a Word document so you can edit stuff if you want, add your own notes in. Okay. So let's paint a picture though. It's dawn on the first day of the week. It's Sunday. The women get up before dawn. This is all stuff compiled from all those accounts together, right? So before dawn, while it's still dark, they get up. They're on their way to the tomb to anoint the body of Jesus. And they're wondering, I think Mark 16:3 says, how they're going to get this massive stone out of the way, right? Because obviously, I don't think that they likely know that the soldiers were there. I don't know that they would think that the tomb had been sealed by by the Jewish people on the Sabbath, right? And so when you look at all the accounts, you have Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome that's traveling, okay? So before they get there, there's an earthquake, and an angel rolls away the stone, and he sits on it. Now, in the Bible, what is the common reaction to seeing angels?
Most people are terrified, or they'll fall on their face.
Yeah.
Some people mistake them and try to worship them.
Yeah. It's always like fear and reverence.
Yeah.
Right?
It's always like, you know that this whatever being in front of you can take care of business.
Yeah.
You need to treat this like you're in the presence of something powerful.
That's right. And so it says when there's that earthquake and the angel rolls away the stone, some people have made an argument, I think, from maybe the word in John, that it looked like it was like a violent, like a picking up and tossing. I'm not sure if I am fully on board with that because I don't see that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I don't think. I may be getting those mixed up, but there's a word in there somewhere. So basically, the soldiers' reaction is the exact same reaction most people have in the Bible. The soldiers are terrified and they pass out, right? Now, when the women arrive and they see the stone is gone, it seems like, I'm assuming that the soldiers have already woken up and have taken off, right? And it seems like when they get there, the angels aren't outside the tomb. So there's an earthquake, the angel rolls the stone away, terrifies the soldiers. I'm assuming they awoke and left. And then there's been some passage of time. And when the women arrive, the angels aren't outside the tomb. And so the women immediately go into the tomb and there's no body. This is really where Scott helped me out here. Because what happens here is Mary, she immediately leaves, right? So Mary leaves before the other women experience the encounter with the angels. Okay, so it says, so Mary immediately realizes she has to go tell the apostles because the tomb's empty, right? So she runs to tell Peter and John, okay? When she gets to Peter and John, the only info she has is that the tomb is empty. Look at John 20, 1 and 2. John 20, 1 and 2.
All right.
All right, read it when you get it.
Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the tomb had been taken away from saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him."
Okay, so the reasoning that I'm fairly certain that she leaves before the other women see the angels is because when she gets to Peter, what does she say? They took away the Lord. We don't know where they laid him.
Yeah.
Whereas whenever you shortly are going to see the women see the other women that stayed speak to the angel said, he's risen. Mm-hmm. She doesn't know that, it seems like. So she runs to Peter, all right? So she runs. As soon as they get to the tomb, they see there's no body, right? The tomb is empty. Mary immediately leaves. The other women are still there, okay? Now, the next, what you have is the women see the angels, and the angel speaks to them, okay? So let's go to Matthew. Yeah, go to Matthew 28 and read 5 through 8. And so basically what's going to happen here is as Mary leaves and runs to tell Peter and John, the other women stay there. And it says they're perplexed about where the body went. Mary doesn't know that. She already left. So then 2 angels appear to the women and they say, "Fear not. I know you seek Jesus. He's here. He's risen." So, and then basically those women leave with fear, okay, but also joy. So read Matthew 28, 5 through 8.
But the angel answered and said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he's risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy and ran to bring his disciples word.
Okay, so Mary's not with them because when she gets to Peter and John,
yeah, she
doesn't know
that his body had been stolen, so
yes.
she left early before the message was delivered to the others by the angel.
That's right. Okay, so the other women start to leave and head back, right?
Right.
So look at John 20, 3 through 10. So here's what's going to happen here. So Mary doesn't know that the angels, what they told the other woman, right? That Jesus is risen.
Right.
She already left, and she basically just tells them the tomb's gone, right? And so, yeah, read John 20, 3 through 10.
Peter therefore went out and the other disciple and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first.
I wonder if for the first time Peter, actually, I started to say, but the first time Peter read John's account, but Peter likely would have been martyred if John's account was written late first century by then. So maybe Peter never got to, but it seems like John's taking this little jab at Peter, like John's much faster than Peter, right? Verse 20, they ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter.
I see that, but I think about it like, and I wonder why the Lord told him to write it that way, Like,
I don't know, maybe.
Like, why did the Lord tell Moses to write that there was no man more humble upon the face of the earth except for Moses? Why would you make Moses write that? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. That's a good point.
I don't know what he's trying to do here.
That's a good point.
But it is interesting.
Yeah,
it is. It is really interesting. It's kind of like Moses, really, because it's John writing this, right?
Yeah.
And he's talking about himself in this third person almost. Like,
outran Peter.
Maybe he read Moses. He's like, God, please don't make me use my name like you did Moses. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know.
All right, pick up verse 5.
Anyway,
I'm done interrupting.
And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes lying there. Yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came and following him and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who came to the tomb first, went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their own homes. And of course, when it says they didn't know, they don't mean like literally they never heard it. They just didn't comprehend what he meant yet.
I think it's Mark 8:31, Mark 9:31. In Mark 10:32 and 33, maybe. I know it's in Mark 8, 9, and 10, and like within 3 verses, where Jesus told them that the Son of Man has to suffer and die, and he'll be resurrected.
Yeah, all it means here is they didn't get it.
Well, yeah, some translations, I believe, that was understand. They didn't understand it.
Okay, that's better.
Yeah, but basically what happens is Mary left, tells them. The other women have had an encounter with the angel. So they're like running, and I don't know if they took different routes. I don't know exactly where the crucifixion or the tomb site was. I don't know how far of a run it was. But it seems like they must have crossed paths without seeing each other because they don't interact, right? And so Peter gets there. John gets there first. And then Peter, when he gets there, runs straight into the tomb, right? This is another thing that whenever Scott told me, hey, he makes 2 trips, it makes total sense. Scott Kane. When he said, hey, Peter made 2 trips. Because in the first trip, Peter does what? Runs right into the tomb, right? So John follows in. They don't see anything. Mary has come back with them, all right? And so they all go in, they see the clothing, they see the face folded or rolled up. Peter and John decide to leave. And guess who stays again? Mary. I got to say, man, like this study really made me appreciate Mary Magdalene so much more.
Yeah.
Like you really see the devotion that she had to Jesus.
Who stayed with him?
I know.
The women.
The women did. And
there's something to be said for that.
We'll see, I guess, in a second. Who ultimately, all right, I'll get ahead of myself. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary is still there. All right. Stay in John. So Peter and John have left. So Mary is still at the tomb, right? Read John chapter 20. Read verses 11 through 18.
Okay. But Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb, and she saw 2 angels in white sitting, one at the head of the other, and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Then they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Now, when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabboni," which is to say, "Teacher." Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her.
Okay. So Mary's standing outside weeping. She still doesn't know what happened to Jesus. Remember, she wasn't there when the first angels came. And so she basically says the same thing to these angels whenever they talk to her. So she hasn't heard the message. She doesn't know he's already resurrected, or else she probably wouldn't be weeping. You know, if she knew that Jesus was resurrected, she may be confused, but I don't know that she'd still be crying. And so when you read John 20, 11 through 18, she stooped. Remember this. She stooped and looked down into the tomb. Remember that for Peter when he comes back a second time, all right? She saw 2 angels sitting there. They said, woman, why are you weeping? And then she says, they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. She says this, she turns and sees Jesus and didn't know it was Jesus. Here's another side note. In the last episode, we talked about this idea, the swoon theory. Well, Jesus just sort of passed out for a couple days, and he hit the cold slab wrapped in linen, which doesn't make sense. And he arose, and then he appeared to these people. Well, he appears to Mary. If he's not truly resurrected and transformed, then she'd what? Recognize him, either by him looking like the Jesus who was crucified or by all the blood that he'd have all over him, right?
Yeah.
And so she doesn't recognize him. And basically, she thinks he's the gardener and says, if you've carried away my Lord, tell me where you've laid him. I will take him away. She seems to me to be more dedicated than the apostles are at this point.
Oh, she is.
And then Jesus says to her, Mary, and she turns and says, Rabboni. I don't know if
far
she,
more loyal.
Yeah. Does she recognize his voice? Does when she turned to look,
I think so. I don't know. Look, these are one of those sections where my mind immediately floods to old phrases I've read in other places, like my sheep will know me by my voice, things like that. And he called her name. So it's because he revealed himself to her by doing it that way.
Yeah.
Similar to the way he always taught that
Yeah.
his disciples would know him when they heard his voice.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And so she finally turns and says, Rabboni, which means teacher.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says this, do not cling to me, for I've not yet ascended to my Father. I think she's hanging on his feet. I think she's probably hanging on his feet. I'll show you another reason why.
Probably so.
I'll show you why later, I think.
In other places.
That's right. And so he says, I have not yet ascended to my Father, but you need to go to my brethren and tell them that I'm going to ascend to my Father and your Father. And then it says in verse 18, she came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and he'd spoken these things to her. So she sees Jesus, all right? Now, it's interesting to me that guess who Jesus shows himself to next? Not Peter, not John. Go to Matthew 28, look at 9, Matthew 28, 9 and 10. So this is now the other group of women who left first. So all the women go to the tomb. There's no body. Mary leaves to get Peter and John. The other women stay. They see the angels. They find out he's resurrected. They're leaving to go. And I don't know if Mary Magdalene is just fast because she goes and gets Peter. They come back to the tomb and then read 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
Yeah, Matthew 28, 9 and 10. This is as the other women were going to tell the disciples about what the angel told them that Jesus is risen. Look at what happens. Matthew 28, 9 and 10.
Excuse me. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, rejoice. So they came and held him by the feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me.
So he appeared to Mary Magdalene first outside the tomb after Peter and John had left. Then the other women. I always hear people say God's misogynistic. It's crazy to me that God chose the very first witnesses, at least 3, maybe more women, I don't know, to be the first witnesses of the most important event in the whole history of mankind. Like the resurrection is the focal point of Jesus' life. The crucifixion too.
Who got to see him last?
I don't know.
Was it Thomas?
Well, no, because he ascended in Bethany.
Well, that's true. I meant from the core group, but okay, sure.
Well,
I'll table that thought for later.
We'll get
I'm
there.
Not sure.
So, I mean, you'd also have 1 Corinthians 15, where it's seen by Cephas and the 12, which is going to happen a week. The same, yeah.
Yeah, so, I don't have it fully, but I was thinking, I wonder if he's showing himself to them in the order of like,
I don't know.
Who had faith the most or something? Who stayed?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to put it past
like
them.
The women went to the cross with him. The other disciples scattered, and Thomas, doubting Thomas, as we call him, had the least amount. I don't know though.
Yeah, I mean, the other disciples doubted too. We always give Thomas a bad name.
That's true.
So, yeah, people say God's misogynistic. He hates women. It's like God chose women to be the very first ones to see the angels.
Yep.
And to be the first witnesses, the most important event all of mankind has ever known.
Yeah, so they're all through his lineage.
Exactly.
There's a lot to say about that.
Exactly. So this now that Jesus has appeared to Mary Magdalene, now to the other women, they're going to deliver the news to the rest of the apostles, which anyway, the women, they're already further along than Mary is, right? So they arrive first. And when they get there, the people are mourning and weeping. Look at Mark 16, 10 and 11. I'll read this one. So she went and told those who had been with him as they mourned and wept. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. So then basically the ladies arrive and tell them they don't believe. Mary arrives and tells them they don't what? They don't believe. Mary says, Jesus is alive. He appeared to me. They don't believe it. I assume that Mary, this is assumption. I think that Mary probably tells Peter exactly what she was doing. And here's why I think so. This is Peter's second trip back, right?
Yeah.
So Peter and John already went once. And what did Peter do as soon as he got there the first time?
As soon as he got there the first time, he ran right in. Yeah, past
now,
John.
He left, and Mary sees Jesus. And if you remember John 20 and verse 11, John 20:11, when Mary Magdalene saw Jesus, Mary stood outside the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she what? Stooped down and looked inside the tomb. All right? Remember that. She goes then and tells everybody back at the house, assuming obviously Peter's there. And then look at what Peter does. Read Luke 24:12. This is Peter's second trip to the tomb.
But Peter arose and ran to the tomb, and stooping down, he saw the linen clothes lying by themselves, and he departed, marveling to himself at what had happened.
So what did he do compared to what Mary Magdalene did when she saw Jesus? He did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
John 20:11 says Mary stooped outside and looked in. And Peter, the first time, ran straight in. I don't know if I'm Peter thinking, well, I shouldn't have run in. I'm going to go do exactly what Mary Magdalene does. And I can only imagine what do you think he wants to say to Jesus? Put yourself in Peter's perspective. What have you done to Jesus before he was crucified?
Yeah, and then you didn't show up either. Yeah, you just want to apologize, right?
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine if I'm Peter, you
want to know how mad he is at you, and you want to apologize. You want to do whatever. That's what I would be feeling. That's what I'd be feeling so much guilt.
Yeah.
You know?
He realizes, he ran to the tomb the first time and didn't get to see him. So he comes back. And now it seems like he hears it again. He's the only one that runs back, at least as far as I can tell from what the text says. So Peter hears, and he hears exactly what Mary did, Mary Magdalene, is that she stooped outside and looked in. So Luke 24:12, Peter arose, ran to the tomb, and stooping down, saw the linen cloths and departed, marveling to himself. So Peter is basically thinking, I've got to see Jesus. I've got to apologize for betraying him. I'm going to do exactly what Mary did. And he leaves marveling. I can only wonder, what a roller coaster of emotions for Peter. Because in the garden, he did what? He took out his
sword,
tried to defend Jesus.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, don't do that. Put it away.
Mm-hmm.
Then basically he's told earlier that you're going to betray him. I wonder if Peter's trying to say, I'm not going to betray you. I'll cut a guy's ear off for it, right? So he denies, and of course he's told he's going to betray. Before the rooster crows 3 times, you'll deny me.
Yeah.
Then he has the up in the garden where he tries to defend him with a sword. Jesus says, don't do that. Then he denies Jesus 3 times. And one of the accounts said that Jesus turned and looked at him. Do you know which account that is?
No, but I do know what you're talking about.
I'm going to look it up.
And looked over at him. It makes me think too about later when he's on the beach and Jesus is asking him, do you love me? Mm-hmm. Is this all building up to that moment when he's crying on the beach and he's like, oh. Peter just always seems to be somebody who struggled throughout that ministry, but was...
I just think he's emotional.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Because he does good. He always is the first to speak. He's always the first to speak, to run, to pull his sword, and then at the same time, you'd say, well, he's the one that denied him, but he's also the one who ran to the tomb twice.
He's zealous.
Yes.
But sometimes a little foolhardy.
Which probably describes a lot of us.
But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He undeniably cares, but he just gets himself into these dumb situations sometimes where he makes the wrong choice. Anyway, I don't know. Anyway,
so I found it. It's in Luke. It's in Luke 22:54. Okay, where it starts. Having arrested him, Jesus, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house, but Peter followed at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them, and a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, "This man was also with him." But Peter, he denied it, saying, "Woman, I don't know him." And after a little while, another saw him and said, "You also are one of them." And Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then after an hour had passed, another confidently affirmed, you just skipped my thing. Where am I at? Go back. All right. Where was I at? Luke 60. Okay, here we go. He is a Galilean. Okay, another one confidently affirms. This is verse 59. Surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are saying." Immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. Listen to this. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times." Could he see Jesus the whole time? I mean, I don't know how the setup was, but he denies Jesus 3 times, and Jesus turns and looks at him. What? And then it says Peter went out and wept bitterly. Is that the last time he saw Jesus? I think it is.
I think so.
I mean,
I
unless
can't
there's
think
something
of anywhere after that, really. And as far as I know, the other text supporting it, they went on about their way. The only people that went to the cross would have been John and the women, right?
John and the women are the only ones that are there.
So yeah, seemingly so, Peter saw him condemned, felt the guilt of fulfilling the prophecy that Christ had given him just a little before, you're going to deny me 3 times, and ran. And
then he goes out and weeps bitterly.
Then the next time he sees him is probably, as far as I can tell in the text,
he hasn't seen him in our work. He hasn't seen him yet where we're at. Yeah. So the scourging and crucifixion, where were they? The earthquakes in the city, the 3 hours of darkness, where were they? They weren't at the cross. Then he finally gets the news. I'm assuming they were probably, later they were like holed up in a house trying to hide because they were afraid. I'm assuming that's probably where they were during the crucifixion and the scourging. I don't know. I'm just assuming it. But then the news finally reaches him that Jesus is dead. And he's probably been sad since Friday, Saturday. And then Sunday morning, he finally hears that the tomb's empty. He runs, doesn't see him, comes home. Mary brings the news he's resurrected. The other women bring it. He doesn't believe it. He runs again anyway.
And they, at this point, are surprised. He marvels at it, right? They hadn't yet understood what he meant about the resurrection that said earlier. We talked about that. Think about what he would have felt. And all of them, when the sun darkened for that time, the earth shook. They're like, man, I mean, I just have a hard time thinking they didn't know what was going on.
Well, they doubted during his ministry and they still believed in him in a sense. So it's kind of like I believe, help my unbelief. I'm sure that they believed in some things, but they were wondering.
That's what I'm saying. If you're Peter and you ran off and you know this man is from God and you've made the profession, thou art the Christ and all this stuff.
Seen miracles.
And then he prophesies correctly and you know you were wrong and you weep bitterly and you're running and then all these other signs continue to come and you're just out there. You're just out there. Just doing your own thing. What's he sitting there thinking that whole time while he's seeing this stuff?
Yeah.
Didn't he ever consider going back? I think
they were scared. I think they were.
I think so, man. Yeah. And definitely I think the guilt probably influenced him a lot too. But anyway.
So at this point, the soldiers are now discussing Matthew 28's account, verse 11 through 15. We don't have to read that. But basically, they're saying, well, the disciples stole the body while we slept. Well, we already talked about how ridiculous that is. So the disciples had abandoned Jesus, and now something has happened that's going to change their entire life, right? So the next event, I think, is the road to Emmaus, all right? So the women, what did Jesus tell the women? He said, hey, tell the disciples to meet me in Galilee, right? Jesus doesn't seem that, in that big of a hurry to see him, okay? But go to Luke chapter 24. This is the road to Emmaus, okay? So notice through this account that the guy speaking is Cleopas, right? So go to Luke 24, start in verse 13, and let's read this account. And notice who does all the talking, okay? Is this guy named Cleopas. All right, read, start in verse 13 and just read.
Now behold, 2 of them were traveling the same day to a village called, what is that, Emmaus?
Emmaus.
Emmaus. Yeah, that's probably right. Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. And so it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained so that they did not know him. And he said to them, what kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad? Then the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, are you the only stranger in Jerusalem, and have you not known the things which happened there in these days? And he said to them, what things? So they said to him, these things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priest and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who is going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the 3rd day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. When they did not find his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see.
That's Peter and John. That's when okay.
Then he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone further, but they constrained him Did I read that right?
You did.
Yeah, he indicated that he would have gone further, but they constrained him.
He was going to keep going, but they basically
correct.
say, no, stay with us.
And saying, abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed, and broke it, and gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said one to another, did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scripture to us?
Okay, now keep going. Read 33 and 30 through 35.
Okay, so they arose up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 and those who were with them had gathered together, saying, the Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. And they told about the things that had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread.
Okay, verse 34. The Lord is risen and has appeared to who?
Simon.
Simon who? Simon what?
Peter.
When did he appear to Peter?
Well,
I wonder now, unless there's just something else that I'm missing.
Good question.
Unless I'm missing something, and if someone's watching it and you think, hey, there's a verse that I'm not missing or I'm not putting something together, please email me because I'll fix it if I get it wrong. I think Peter is the other guy on the road to Emmaus.
Maybe.
Okay, because look at 1 Corinthians 15, right? 1 Corinthians 15:5. I'll just read it from my software. Okay. 1 Corinthians 15:5. Okay, it's given the order of the Jesus appeared to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It talks about the death, burial, and resurrection. Okay, verse 4, verse 5, and that he was seen by Cephas, and then by who? Then by the 12. Yeah. So the first person he appears to, it says, of the apostles is who? Peter, and then by who?
12.
The 12. So the order is Peter, and then the 12.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go back to Luke chapter 24, it seems to me like the guy talking the whole time is Cleopas, and I think the other person with Cleopas is guess who?
Peter.
Guess who doesn't say a word? Is that like Peter?
Maybe. I don't know. No. That's not like Peter to not say a word.
No. So
sorry, I was thinking.
Yeah, I could be wrong. And if there's something I'm missing, please somebody that watches this tell me. But I think Peter is the one with Cleopas. And why doesn't Peter do any of the talking? He's always the one to talk first. He's always the one to rush into the tomb. And so then Jesus comes to them on the road. They don't know it's Jesus. Cleopas they say, what are you talking about? He's like, are you the only guy that lives in a cave that doesn't know what's happening in Jerusalem? And then basically Jesus explains to him. He tries to go past. They say, no, stay with us. And they sit to break bread. Jesus took it, blessed it, gave it to them. And I wonder if Peter had a flashback of the Lord's Supper from 3 days ago. And it says their eyes were open. They recognize it's who? Jesus. Then he what? He vanishes.
He vanished.
And I wonder if Peter is thinking, how did I not know him, that was him on the road when he explained the scripture? And it says they rose up that very hour. Now, it's 7 miles to Jerusalem, okay? That's a long way. In a car, it's not. But if you're walking, that's a long walk, all right? I assume it's getting late in the day, which is why they stopped at Emmaus and didn't keep going further. And so basically it's towards the end of the day, but they have this news that they have to tell. So what do they? They rush back, right? Yeah. And so they rush 7 miles back to Jerusalem. And this is where it's the Sunday evening assembly, if you want to say. And so they were in a room with the door shut, and they were afraid of the Jews. Look at, where are we at? Luke? Go to Luke. Let's see. Go to Luke 24, 36. No, let's go to John's account. Go to John 20:19. Okay. That same day at evening, being the what? First day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for what? Fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, peace be with you, right? So the same day as the road to Emmaus of Luke chapter 24, verse 33. Actually, if you go back to Luke's account, Luke 24 or Luke 23, 24, let's see. Verse 35 is where we left off. They told about the things that had happened to them on the road to Emmaus and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. Now, as they said these things, Jesus stood in the midst of them and said to them, peace to you, right? So unless there's some other occurrence that's not recorded in the Bible where Jesus appeared to Peter first, that's the only, which I just don't think that makes sense. Then the other guy on the road to Emmaus was Peter. So Peter is walking with Cleopas, seems to me.
I mean, it seems very plausible.
And he keeps his mouth shut the whole time. What's he thinking about? I think he's thinking about how he betrayed Jesus. He ran to the tomb twice wanting to see him, to apologize to him. He doesn't get to until Jesus appears to him in the breaking of bread. And then they immediately run back to tell the other disciples, who apparently are still in Jerusalem. And then they're in the door with the room shut. They're afraid of the Jews, which is probably where they were since they abandoned him other than John. I would assume if they're there after the resurrection, they're probably there before. I could be wrong. And so I can imagine this. Jesus appears out of thin air. They're scared. He calms them down, shows them his hands and his feet. And this is actually the part where basically all of them doubted, right? If you look at verse 37, they were terrified and frightened and supposed they'd seen a spirit. And he said to them, why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your heart? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. That's in Luke 24:39. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, do you have any food? I can imagine like being in that room, Jesus appears and you doubt, and he says, believe it. And then you're wiping back tears from your eyes. And Jesus is like, hey, I'm kind of hungry. Do you guys have anything?
Yeah. Hey, there's a lesson there just about the way God uses his abilities in the first place. But that's a side note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he magically appears in a locked room and then asks, hey, do you have any food? So they gave him broiled fish and honeycomb.
Yeah, it's like, well, the food's already here. I don't need to perform a miracle. It's like, just give me the food.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is, so basically, after in Mark's account, this is where the Great Commission happens. In Matthew's account, it seems like it may have happened, or maybe there's two different commissions, but maybe it happened towards the end of Bethany. But so they're in the Sunday evening, right? And Jesus appears to them and all of them see, right? Now, 8 days later, Jesus appears again. Go to John 20:24. And this is where the guy everybody gives a bad rap to is with him because he wasn't there the week before, right? So it's 8 days later, which I believe is saying it's the next Sunday, so 8 days after, okay? And it says, John 20, read 24 through 29.
All right. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. The other disciples therefore said to him, we have seen the Lord. Let me make sure I'm reading this.
You're reading the right place.
Okay. We have seen the Lord. So he said to them, unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe.
Now, what did the other ones do whenever Jesus appeared? Jesus said you got doubts, and Jesus showed his hands, right?
Yeah.
So they doubted too. Read 26 through.
And after 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen, yet have believed. So Thomas ultimately got the same thing as the others.
He did. He wasn't there when they originally. Yeah. And why wasn't he there? I mean, it seems like Peter and Cleopas weren't going to be there until they meet Jesus. So I'm not trying to give Thomas. Some people say, well, Thomas should have been assembled with them. It's like, well, Peter and Cleopas weren't. They were on their way to Emmaus. I believe that's Peter for whatever reason, right? So then 8 days later, Jesus appears, and it seems like he knows what Thomas said already because he basically just tells him, hey, here. So Jesus, number one, didn't like scold him for doubting in a sense. He basically just provided, he could have said, what do you need the evidence for? You didn't trust my word, but he basically gives him the evidence. And yet, what does everybody call Thomas?
Especially these days,
doubting Thomas. He gets a bad rap, man.
Oh, he needed to see him and touch him. The text doesn't actually say that he had to touch him or that he did touch him. Even though he did say it, Jesus in reality just showed him the same thing as the others, and he accepted it at sight. It doesn't say anything about, well, he needed to put his hand in there, right?
Yeah, the other guys doubted too.
Yeah, Jesus told him he could. He said, go ahead. But what was Thomas's answer? My Lord and my God.
Yeah, we don't.
He didn't say, oh, okay, let me do that real quick.
Yeah, and then later, doubting Peter plunges into the. No, we don't call him that.
No. Thomas accepted it when he saw it, just like the rest of them.
That's right. So after this is basically where, remember, Jesus told the ladies, hey, tell them to go into Galilee and I'll meet them. Well, then basically the disciples go away into Galilee where Jesus told them to go. If you look at John chapter 21, 1 through 25, we're not going to read the entire account. But basically, here's what happens. The disciples go to Galilee, and while they're waiting for Jesus, they decide to what? Fish.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard some people say, well, they were just going back to their old occupation because they'd given. I don't think so. I think they were just killing time.
You know, I've said that before.
Yeah.
But, you know, maybe not.
Maybe I've said it. I forget a lot of stuff I said last week. So
yeah, and you know what, man? I reserve the right to improve myself and learn more things.
Sure.
And if I do, I will correct myself.
Sure. So once again here, the disciples go to Galilee, and while they're waiting, they fish. And then Jesus appears on, listen, I got to read this. I can't skip over this. Just go to John 21, verse 1. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. That's the Sea of Galilee. It's a different name. And in this way, he showed himself. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 of the other disciples were together. And so Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. They said to him, we're going with you also. So they went out and immediately got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. When the morning had now come, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know it's Jesus, right? So whatever his resurrected body is, however he masked it, Mary didn't recognize him. She thought he was the gardener. The guys on the road to Emmaus didn't recognize him. They just thought he was another traveler, right? I don't know how that works, okay? They didn't know it was Jesus. Then Jesus said to them, children, have you any food? And they answered him, no. Then he said, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. So they cast, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Now, therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, he looks at Peter and says what?
It is the Lord.
It's the Lord.
It's the Lord. It's the same thing how he first drew them.
Now, when Simon Peter, that's right. It's like John knows.
Yeah.
He knows it's Jesus. Now, Simon Peter, when he heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he'd removed it, and he does what?
Plunged into the sea.
That's Peter, man.
Yep.
He wanted to talk to him at the tomb twice. As soon as he sees him on the road, he disappears before he even gets a chance to say anything to him. He's been waiting for over a week now.
Peter said, no need for more information.
I'm not waiting.
I am going.
And he leaves he doesn't care about the fish, right? But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from land, about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. So the other guys are like, well, yeah, we go see Jesus, but let's bring the fish in first. Peter doesn't care, man. He's gone. He's swimming through the water. Then as soon as they came to land, they saw a fire of coals there and fish laid on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you've just caught. As if, like you said, he could have just made some. But Simon Peter went up and dragged the net to land full of large fish, 153. Although there were so many, the net was not broken. If you want to know 153, I've looked into that a lot. I can't figure it out. I don't know if there's even an answer for why it's 153. Some people have some crazy explanations, but I don't know that I buy those. Jesus said to them, come and eat breakfast. Yet none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you, knowing it was the Lord. So does that mean in his resurrected body, they still didn't recognize him, but they just knew it was him because of his voice? They just knew it was him. He definitely wasn't the same. They didn't recognize.
I don't know how it works, but I really think it is tied into that idea.
It has to be.
They're his disciples. They had been with him. They had already in some ways done miracles themselves.
Mm-hmm.
How can you listen to someone teach you those things for 3 years, spend all that time with him, and then be put in this situation and not,
you'd have to, yeah. Whether it's the mannerisms.
I felt this before, to have the hair stand up and that feeling go down your spine. I know what's going on right now,
1 John 3 and verse 2, beloved, we are now children of God, but it has not yet appeared as what we will be. We know that when he appears, we will be like him because we will see him just as he is. But it says it's not appeared to us, yet we will be. Now, I could be wrong on that, but I wonder, is that saying like we basically don't know what we're going to be like yet? Like the I'd say
that's
I've read
exactly where my mind goes. Yeah. And I think this is it, because he's been transformed. He has been resurrected. Resurrected.
Yeah.
He's the first fruits of that.
Yeah.
What kind of body are we going to receive? One like his?
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean exactly? I don't know exactly what that means, but I do know that it means something about it being different. It's not like it is right now exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway.
And then verse 14 says, this is now the third time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. So Sunday night, a week later when Thomas was there, and now at the Sea of Galilee, right? And so now Peter finally gets to have his conversation with Jesus.
Right.
And he basically gives Peter a chance to redeem himself. We're just going to read it. Verse 15.
Yeah, I'm just on the text, actually. I ended to flip back to the outline.
Awesome. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, this is verse 15 of John 21, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? Some people speculate, does he mean the fish, or is he referencing the other disciples, right? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now there's an exchange that somebody pointed out to me once. if you look at those exchanges, if you look at the Greek word that he uses,
it's a different word.
It's a different one. So, do you love me? In verse, I think this is 15, Jesus says to Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you agape me? It's the highest form of love.
Agapeo, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do you agape me? Love, right? Or agapao, whatever the verb.
Agapao, however you want to say it.
Yeah. And then Peter says to Jesus, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. Brotherly love. So it's almost like Jesus, I mean, this is my take on it. I could be wrong. If you have better information you're watching, reach out to me. I'd love for you to enlighten me. Jesus says, Peter, do you have the highest form of love for me? It's almost like Peter's trying to be humble because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but like he realized that he betrayed Jesus. He says, I brotherly love you, right? Feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you agapao me? Do you agape love me, the highest form of love? He said to him again, Lord, you know that I phileo love you like a brother. Then it says, he said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you, and Jesus the third time doesn't use agape, like he uses the word phileo. Do you phileo love me? Do you love me like a brother? And it says Peter was what? Grieved. Because he said to him a third time, do you phileo love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I phileo love you. So unless I'm misunderstanding that, Jesus says, do you have the highest form of love for me, Peter? And Peter doesn't want to say that because he knows he's betrayed him. And he says, I love you like a brother. Now, maybe I'm missing something.
I don't know either. And maybe you're right. One of the thoughts that comes to my mind is just, and not to be contrary, it just maybe Peter is thinking that phileo is better. And he's like,
it's possible.
I phileo you. Why do you ask me, do I agape you? I phileo you.
Yeah.
Do you agapeo me? Or however you say it. How did you say it? Agapeo?
Agapao. I don't know.
I phileo you. What were you talking about? And then he's finally like, do you phileo me?
Maybe.
And he's like, devastated.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, maybe it's that.
I don't know. I mean, if you're a viewer and if you have more insight into that, please send me an email, AuthenticChristianPodcast@gmail.com, and help me out, because to me, it's like he gives him a chance to redeem himself because he denied him 3 times.
Maybe so.
So he has a chance to tell him he loves him 3 times.
Yeah, there's that parallel there.
So is that what it is? And then if you look at whatever happens after that, look at what he says to him. Verse 18. Most assuredly, I say to you, so Jesus is speaking to Peter, and it's singular, it's not the plural, like you all. I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. So Jesus, in essence, seems like he's saying, you're going to die what? Like this one day. What are you thinking when Jesus tells you that? I would think that he's thinking, I'm going to be crucified one day. Now, the Bible doesn't say it, but history says Peter was crucified. That's how he died. But history says Peter said, crucify me upside down. I'm not worthy to die the same way death is my Lord. So verse 20, then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, who had also leaned on his breast at the supper and said, Lord, who is the one that betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, but Lord, what about this man? So Peter is just told, hey, you're going to die one day, I'm assuming by crucifixion. And Peter sees John following. He's like, what about John? And Jesus says, if I will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. So Jesus is saying, if he stays until I return, what is that to you? Like basically, doesn't matter what his future is. You need to do what?
Yeah, what do you need to do?
You follow me. If he lives till I return the second coming, which obviously didn't happen, then what is it to you? You still need to follow me, right? And that's sort of an individual responsibility. I need to follow God no matter what.
It's almost like Peter's problem that night when he betrayed Jesus was he was worried too much about what other people thought, what other people were going to do, and what was going to happen to them, what their fates were, instead of worrying about himself and what he should have been doing.
Maybe.
You know, maybe he's just trying to drill that home. I don't know.
Maybe he was genuinely curious. Either way, I don't know.
Yeah. It's probably a combination of things. Who's to say there's only one thing that the Lord was thinking of? I don't know.
Yeah. And then verse 23, it says, then this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die, speaking of John. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come. What is that to you? Some people are saying till Jesus comes in judgment on Jerusalem, right? Judgment against Jerusalem. I don't know. But basically you see that John lived at least till the 90s. If you take the late date of Revelation, I'm sure there's someone out there that thinks he died earlier than that. And I don't claim to have all the answers, and so what you have here is you have the resurrection morning, if we can summarize. Well, let's go to Acts 1:3 first. Acts 1:3 tells us that Jesus presented himself alive after his suffering, right, by many infallible proofs, being seen by them during 40 days and speaking of the things pertaining to the kingdom of God. Acts 1:4. So he spent 40 days with them. Acts 1:4. Being assembled together with them, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait until the promise of the Father, which he said, you have heard from me. For John truly baptized with water, but you shall be baptized with the Holy Spirit many days from now. So basically, Jesus says the same thing in Luke 24. He says he spends 40 days with them after the resurrection, right? So he appears to them on day one, Resurrection Sunday. He appears to the women first. Then he appears to Cleopas and I think Peter on the road to Emmaus. Later that night, they go back to Jerusalem. He appears to them when they're in the locked room. A week later, Thomas is there. He appears to them. So that's now what? 14 days? Mm-hmm. And then he spends another 26 days with them. So a total of 40 days, right? And then he tells them they've worked their way back down to basically where he ascends into heaven. And so he tells them, hey, you need to wait in Jerusalem, right? So they have to wait in Jerusalem for what? I don't know. Another 10 days, 10, 15 days. And then he says, basically, you need to wait until the baptism of the Holy Spirit comes to you. And then that's what's going to happen. You're going to basically go out into the world. Look at verse 6. Therefore, when they had come together, they asked him, saying, Lord, will you restore the kingdom to Israel at this time? And he said, it's not for you to know times or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority. But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem and all Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Verse 9. Now when he had spoken these things, while they watched, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly towards heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, who said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will also come in a like manner as you saw him ascend into heaven. So he ascends when he's in Bethany, which means they've made their way back down. It seems like he gave the Great Commission before the ascension. And basically the angels, after he ascends into heaven, they say, hey, he ascended and he's going to come back in the same manner, right? He ascended what? Physically, visibly. And one day, whenever the Lord returns, what's going to happen?
He'll descend.
He'll descend physically and visibly. Mm-hmm. There's other passages you can read for time's sake. Psalm 24, 7 through 10 basically gives, some early Christians wrote that this was, let's go there. Psalm 24, 7 through 10. Now, this is what some of the early Christians said happened. They attributed this. That doesn't mean it's right. But like Justin Martyr, he basically, in dialogue with Trypho, I think it's chapter 36, attributed this to Christ's ascension, what happened after he ascended to heaven. Now, that doesn't mean it's right, but that's just what one early person said. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Be lifted up, you everlasting doors. The King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Lift up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Now, he attributed that to basically Justin Martyr, the ascension and entrance into heaven after his victory of defeating death, right? Defeating Satan, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's right. It's just what one early guy thought, right? Look at Daniel 7, 13 to 14. Can you read that one for me?
Say it again.
Daniel 7.
Sometimes you say stuff. I was just thinking about that, what you were saying here.
Well, you can make it. We don't have to go yet. You can make a comment on Psalm 24.
I'm just putting it together. It just really, I kind of like that. I kind of like that. That makes sense. It's poetic, and Psalms are poetic. I can see that. That's all.
It doesn't mean it's right. I'm just saying that's what an early guy said, so it could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm just pondering that, I guess.
But let's say Daniel 7, 13 through 14. Okay. Even if that's not what it's talking about, when Jesus ascends through the clouds, he goes to where? Heaven, because Acts 2.
What is the heaven? It's, what's Psalm say there?
Yeah.
That eternal, or what did it say? Let me go back.
I don't know. I'm not Psalm 24 anymore. Psalm 24, 7 through 10. Lift up your heads, O you gates, everlasting doors, right?
And be lifted up, you everlasting doors. The King of glory shall come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty. I don't know. Maybe.
Well, either way.
Maybe it's symbolic of him opening the entrance and allowing an entrance.
Let's say that's not even what it's talking about. Yeah. Acts 2 says Jesus ascended and he's sitting at whose hand? His right hand?
The Father.
The Father's. Yeah. So Jesus ascends and he's at the Father's right hand. Whether Psalm 24 is talking about it or not, it's still a fact of what happened,
True.
So read Daniel 7, 13 and 14.
All right. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed.
So whether that is another description, I don't know or not. But either way, even if you don't want to, even if you don't think Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is a description after the ascension, or you don't think Psalm 24, 7 through 10 is, either way, we know from Acts 2 that Jesus ascended into heaven, sat down at the right hand of God, and he's there until one day he's going to what? He's going to return.
Yeah, he'll return.
Yeah, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 talks about there's going to be the shout of an archangel, the voice of a trumpet, the dead in Christ will rise first, then we who are alive will be caught up together with those, the dead in Christ, Christians who died first. They'll raise first. Then those we who are alive will rise and meet them in the air, and there will be with the Lord.
Yeah, and that's when he's going to melt the elements thereof.
That's
even
right.
They.
First or 2 Peter 3 uses 5 different Greek words to talk about the dissolving of the earth there.
Yeah.
And so
sounds pretty hot.
Yeah, very hot. And then John 5:22 talks about Jesus will be the judge. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son. And what's he going to judge with? John 12:48.
What word he has spoken.
The words that I've spoken.
And which words has he spoken? That's the only thing I think I might add.
Yeah.
The Holy Spirit brought the words, which he gave the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
And then he brought those words to these inspired men who wrote the scriptures. So which words did he spoke? Literally all of them, not just the red ones.
I agree. Yeah. When you go, I had a guy once ask me about the Bible. I said, I'd give him a Bible. He said, does it have the words red in it? I said, well, no. He's like, I don't want it. I said, we need to study inspiration because John 16, 12 through 15, Jesus said, hey, after I leave, the Holy Spirit's going to guide you into all truth, the people there. You're not going to write of your own authority. The Holy Spirit's going to give you what I wrote, basically.
Yeah.
So when you read, Matthew through Revelation, the whole New Testament, it's from Jesus.
Yeah.
It may have
Who
come
wrote
through
1 Corinthians?
Jesus. And God the Father gave him the message.
What to tell him.
So the Godhead wrote it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So all of it's equal.
So just highlight all.
You're going to be
red.
judged by the New Testament.
That's right. The New Testament. So we should get to know it.
Yep. That's our law book.
Yeah, that's right. Any concluding thoughts?
That was it.
Yeah. So summary, Jesus resurrects. The women go. They see an empty tomb. Mary Magdalene runs to tell Peter and John. The other women are there. They see angels that say he's risen. They head back to tell the disciples too. Mary gets there. Peter and John run. John must be faster because he passes Peter, which sort of tells me Peter had a head start. So he was the first one to run. And maybe John was like, where did Peter go? Well, he's running to the tomb. And so he passes him. They get there. John gets the tomb first. Peter runs right in. They don't see Jesus. They leave. Mary's with them. She stands there crying. She turns around. She sees this guy who she thinks is a gardener. And she says, what did they do with my Lord? She finds out it's Jesus. She's likely holding onto his legs like the other women. I think the other women, I don't remember. They worshiped him. But Jesus basically says, I haven't ascended yet. You can't cling to me. Like, I assume he's me. Hey, get off my legs. It's like when my 3-year-old daughter don't want me to leave, go for work. And she comes and hangs on my legs, right? So then the other women, Jesus appears to the other women. And then the other women go and tell the disciples they don't believe him. What does Peter do? He runs again. He stops just like Mary Magdalene did in John 20 and 11. And he stoops and looks in, doesn't see him. He goes away marveling. Later, road to Emmaus, 2 men are walking. Cleopas is doing all the talking. And I think it's Peter with him who's being quiet until Jesus, the breaking of bread, Jesus sees him and then Jesus vanishes. Peter never gets a chance to tell him those things. Later that night, they go back. He appears in the room to all of them at once. A week later, Thomas is there. And then however much time longer, he finally meets them at the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, where Peter John says it's him. And he just dives out of the boat and goes and meets Jesus and finally gets that conversation. He's been waiting with him. Then he spends 40 days with him and until finally he ascends into heaven. And then they fulfill Acts 1:8, which is to take the gospel to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And that's what the book of Acts is all about. So the book of Acts is what they did after that experience. And you see them taking the gospel to the whole world, willing to be beat and persecuted for it because they didn't care, because they knew that their Lord resurrected. They knew that it wasn't a myth. They knew that he did die, and they knew that he was declared the Son of God by the resurrection of the dead, Romans 1:4. The focal point of all human history.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us on this episode of the Authentic Christian Podcast. We'll see you back on the next episode. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening to the Authentic Christian Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Gospel Broadcasting Network, or GBN for short. You can hop on the App Store, search Gospel Broadcasting Network, and you can download the app. And there's this show, many other great shows that you can watch or listen to and start learning more about the Bible and why we're here, what our purpose is. Thanks for listening.